Peter, I've invited you to take part in this listening circle about anti racism because I think you bring a different perspective, and I think that'll be really helpful.
Well, thank you, Ishreen. I hope that doesn't mean you think I'm a racist. I'm not, you know. I have some very good friends who have been dark, blacky. No, no, what I mean, black. I'm allowed to say black, aren't I? That's no, gosh, that's so difficult, isn't it?
Well,
Uh,
Peter, look, it's more to do with your, you
oh,
know,
my openness and honesty. Oh, yes, I know. I'm appreciated for that. Let's face it. It's not their fault that they're born that way, is it? And I don't mean to include you in that, Ishreen. You're more like us. You can tell that just in the way that you talk. I don't know where you went to school, but I imagine it was a pretty good one. You can tell, you know. Gosh, you can tell so much from the way that a chap, I mean a girl, I mean a lass, I mean a woman who's how they speak. I just can't abide that hip hop accent.
okay,
Can you? Nearly as bad as the Brummie accent.
well, look, Peter,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was wondering if you would like to run a listening
Run the session. Oh, absolutely. Of course I will. Don't feel embarrassed, Ishreen. I see you as a strong, independent young woman, but we all need a strong arm around us in these difficult situations. It needs clear thinking to do this sort of thing, right? And I know that the fairer sex can get over. I don't mean to call you a fairer sex at all. I don't mean to imply that you're anyway. Um,
Peter. Peter, I didn't mean, oh, for goodness sake, I didn't
no need to apologize, Ishri. No need to apologize. Listen, not,
apologizing.
not,
I guess I haven't been clear.
oh, not at all, you sweet little thing. You speak very good English. Listen, I've got to dash. Really looking forward to working with you, although I'm a bit wary of that bunch we're working with. All a bit woke and woolly, can't abide that. But don't worry, I may not have experienced racism, Ishreen, but I'll be pretty clear about my views on it. Anyway, bye for now.
That's what I'm afraid of. Hello, everyone. By the way, we were just acting. acting. Um, so, hey, if you're on Swap Card, we're going to invite you to please come into Zoom because this is an interactive session and we would love you to participate and get the full experience of our listening circles. And yes, Peter and I don't usually interact that way. In case it's the first time you're meeting him. Uh, so look, we're really excited to be sharing our listening circle approach with you. Um, we're belonging pioneers, and we have a diverse team of consultants, coaches um, who have felt experience of working with underrepresented groups. And we've all kind of been through that journey of dealing with it and dealing with the kind of character that Peter was acting as. Um, and Peter's particularly with our team because he represents the majority. And Peter has been through that whole process of thinking all lives matter. Well, I'll let you speak for yourself, Peter, I suppose. But essentially, in taking people through that whole journey, it's important to be able to experience what everybody in the room's experiencing, and we're hoping to give you what that feels like in this session. So, Peter, anything you want to say to just let people know who you
Uh, yes, I should say something, shouldn't I first, I mean, Ishreen talks about my perspective, and I was invited to join a reading group talking about race, working through books primarily, so reading books and then talking about lessons and insights from that. But it's been a challenging journey for me, and as she says, but perhaps I hate the idea of representing the majority. I hate that idea, but I guess in this particular case, it's probably right. And for me, this whole idea of we need to have more conversations about race, I'm not sure about that. because the conversations that I've heard from race normally end in some sort of conflict, either internal, with things left unsaid, or the opposite extreme. So for me, what really I appreciated about Ishreen's approach is the idea of creating a different kind of dialogue, a different kind of circle, where everybody can be involved, not just one side or the other.
So yeah, and I think what you're talking about, Peter, has shown up for me a lot on Clubhouse in conversations about Meghan and Harry, and what I see happening in those rooms is that you've got um, the kind of the people of color, majority black people really, getting quite triggered by the subject and feeling like they've got to just speak and everyone's just got to hear them. And then you'll find, in fact, specific example, then there was a white man who joined the conversation, and he'd been an equerry to the Queen, and he was a magistrate, and he was trying to put that side of the argument. And it basically was, you know, what's been happening is you've got black people talking here about that and the white people talking here about that, and you put them in the room and there's war, and that's not going to move the conversation forward. So what we're looking to do through this approach is really create a space where everybody can speak and everybody can be heard. So that's really why we've created these things that we call listening circles. It's a safe space for challenging each other and having complex conversations, difficult conversations, where for most people it's hard to know what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And so, you know, there are so many different emotions. There's shame about, you know, the past, the privilege, the what you've said that's caused offense and you didn't even mean to cause offense, and then you feel guilty about it. And what all that means is the situation stays stuck. So this conversation's designed to help all of us move beyond that and start to really hear each other effectively. So we're going to get straight into it because we always seem to pack a lot into these listening circles, right, Peter? So we're going to start with for what many of you I think will be used to, but for most of our clients it's a kind of strange experience. But here we go.
I'm going to actually ad-lib a little bit here, Ishreen, just to make up a bit of time.
Yeah.
So I'm going to introduce the dialogue process, but let me just get a quick show of hands because I may be talking something that you're already familiar. How many of you are familiar with dialogue and the dialogue process? I'm seeing one shaking hand. That at least gives me permission. Thanks, Daryl. I'll talk it through then. So it's not a new idea. Some guy called Socrates it was who made this, gave it its reputation. It's come back in the last century through quantum physics. A man called David Bohm, who used it as a way of getting Einstein and Bohr to not work in the normal way of the great intellects of clashing, but actually finding a way for a creativity to emerge from their different theories. But he also talked about it as a way of healing the divisions in our society. So quite topical for where we are at the moment. What it means, dialogos, search for meaning through the words, through the flow of the words between us. How is it different from a normal conversation? In normal conversation, we take our positions and we debate and we argue. That's how we're brought up. We're taught to debate. We're taught that there's a benefit from winning our side of the argument, of defeating the opponent. So it's already ingrained within us, that kind of win-lose. Dialogue is a much more collaborative approach. It's a much more mature approach, which involves us to put our ego and our own ideas, not quite to one side, but to hold them gently so that we can really listen to understand, not to defeat, but to gain a sense of understanding where the idea is coming from. So in these listening circles, we introduce this process of dialogue, and that process is also a way of overcoming what is an incredibly big challenge. Because to have that open mind, to put our ego to one side, you already know this, is not easy. We all come with our judgments, our prejudices, our competitive instinct. So the process that we use is, again, there's no magic to this. The first is being very clear, what is the purpose of the session, so that we can stay on track and not be distracted and taken down side paths. Second step, appoint a facilitator. Even before we begin the dialogue part, we appoint a facilitator to manage the process. And again, it's the recognition that managing ourselves in these, especially in difficult conversations, is not easy. And the facilitator can manage the process, but also manage the energy of the group and manage our energy. I'm not going to go on too long. There's a process for setting up that, the ground rules and the principles that we follow. So establish the purpose, appoint a facilitator, and then the next stage is called preparing hearts and minds. This is important, and it's the recognition that we can't just go into these conversations. If we're not prepared, then we end up in the age-old conflict, the age-old debating. How do we prepare our hearts and minds? One way is the check-in, which I'm guessing you'll be familiar with before we begin. Just how am I now? What's on my mind that I need to let go of? What experiences have I had in the past about these meetings that I need to let go of so that I can be fully present now? Next stage, either establish or remind ourselves of the ground rules. Things like confidentiality, things like respect, and what does that mean? Things like listening, and what does that mean? Things like remember what we agreed about the facilitator and the role of the facilitator. The three practices, again, a reminder of that: speaking with intention, listening with intention, and tending to the well-being of the group, noticing what is happening. We then, which is the bit we skipped just now, there's a mindfulness practice. We're actually going to go through that before we begin our dialogue. But in terms of mindfulness, again, not knowing how familiar you are with this, the mindfulness practice is of huge benefit for entering into dialogue, managing our emotions, and staying focused. Now, clearly, there's a huge benefit if you practice this over the weeks and months, but even in the moment, just a short mindfulness exercise practice can help us to let go and to be focused and in the moment. We'll do one of those in a moment. The dialogue circle. So again, this is an important part of the process, is the recognition that to make this a creative process, a listening process, we need 4 different roles to be played in the dialogue circle. And if you imagine a compass and the points of the compass, at the north we have the voicing role. Whatever the topic, somebody who is prepared to move, to make a suggestion, present an idea. At the east, we have the opposing role. Regardless of the topic, again, this is the devil's advocate, the critic. What do I see that isn't going to work about this? Even if I agree with it, it's the discipline within the group of seeing both sides of the argument, of the idea. At the south, we have the following role. This is listening and supporting both sides. What do I like about this? What do I like about this? What do I not like? What do I not like? And then the fourth role of the West is the bystanding role. It's bystanding, but it's active. What are they doing? They're noticing what is going on within the group. How are people reacting? What are people not saying? What's the energy of the group? And how's that impacting on this? And they bring that into the circle so that we get that side of things as well. That circle, sorry for rushing through this, all the roles, I can now manage the energy of the group and manage that through things like time out and a period of silence, which is actually incredibly productive in dialogue. It stops people from just talking and getting them to think. So silence, the idea of the talking stick you may have come across, there are different practices which can be used to help facilitate this, the flow of the conversation. That's probably all I need to say. Ishreen, have I missed anything important from the dialogue?
No, I think that's perfect. Are we going to practice a mindfulness now?
We are indeed. Yes, we are. So let me find the right one. A quick show of hands. How many of you have practiced mindfulness? Excellent. Casey, never mind, Casey. I'll talk you through it. What it means, though, and again, the more practiced we are, actually, the quicker we can become, we can move into that space. So I'm guessing that all those who have practiced will have their own little ritual. I'll talk you through that very quickly, Casey. And then, as a slightly different practice, I'm going to read out a passage which I've prepared to help me clear my mind ready for dialogue. And what I want you to do is, when you're in that mindful state and listening, is listen to my words as though they're your words, and notice, just notice what kind of reactions, what kind of thoughts come into your mind, what feelings come into your body. So to begin with, just make sure that you're sitting comfortably, your back nice and straight, feet firmly on the floor. Gently close your eyes and bring your attention fully into your physical body now. Feel the ground beneath your feet, where they touch, where they don't touch. Feel the set of your shoulders and just notice any tension that lies there and relax. And each time you breathe out, let those shoulders sink just a little bit further. And as other thoughts come into your mind, as they already have, just notice that. Notice them and let them go. And hold your focus, your attention in your physical body. Notice the rise and fall of your chest. And become conscious of any sensations arising with each breath in, each breath out. And as you breathe out, let any tensions, any unwanted thoughts or anxieties flow out. And listen now to my words. Wait, my friend, do not speak for a moment. Before I can see you clearly, before I can hear your story, I must quieten the beast that lives within me and watches to keep me safe. I must clear the clouds from my eyes and still the voices in my mind. You need to know who I am. You need to know that the beast is a part of me. It has a mind of its own and it is strong. You need to know that those voices, the critic, the clown, the cynic, the child, they never leave me, however much I wish they would. You need to understand that those clouds are the stories of my past, and they color all that I see and hear. And my beast heard those stories too, and is quick to see a threat. You need to know that though I shout out for justice and the rights of all, I can be a racist too. Know this, I have already judged you, shamed though I feel to do so. I see the color of your skin. I hear the sound of your voice. And you are cast already in my stories, hero or villain, friend or foe. I see your shape, your gender, and the cut of your clothes. I see how you stand or walk and how you look at me. And already I know who you are and what you stand for in my stories. Know this, when you shout at me and call me names, I cannot stop the beast from waking and opening his claws. When your voice goes on and on, condemning me or my tribe, then those voices in my mind grow ever louder, shouting to drown out your words, challenge your story. Know this, I am that beast, but I am too a kind, loving soul. I am a racist, but I am too a pure seed of light. I am a killer and a saint. I am a thief and a generous, giving heart. I am a selfish, greedy man, and I am a part of all that is. I am one with all life. So let me quieten the beast that lives within me, clear the clouds from my own eyes, and still those voices in my mind. Now I can hear your story, and I can laugh and weep with you. But wait, my friend, do not speak for a moment. Before you tell me your story, you must first quieten the beast that lives within you. Clear the clouds from your eyes and still the voices in your mind. I know that you have already judged me, and you are right to do so. But did you see all of me? Did you see the racist, misogynistic old man, or did you see the love that sits in my heart? Who would you speak with? Whom would you tell your story to? Do you wish to wound and hurt, to have your revenge? I know that my own beast would, and is expecting that from you. Or do you wish to touch my soul, and for us to walk and work together in this precious life? So now, tell me your story. Let me sit beside you and be with you, not the enemy to attack. Speak softly, so that our beasts, yours and mine, stay quiet, and the voice of our souls can be heard. And I will tell you my story too. It is a part of this. It is a part of our story. Let us for a moment in time sit side by side and see each other as we really are, not the shadow that we fear, although we are aware of that, but the light that shines within us both, within us all, the light that makes us one. Just sit for a moment now. Focus your attention on what you are experiencing right now, in your body, your breathing, your thoughts and emotions, as we prepare to move into dialogue.
So, as you come back, take you through. We've only got an hour. This is typically a 2 to 2.5 hour process. So we're going to share some of the techniques with you. The first thing that's really important in these listening circles is that it feels safe, but also that we get the truth from people. And so we use a technology called Menti, which some of you may know and have used. So if you look at the chat now, there's a link there. If you could please go to www.menti.com, and there's a code it'll ask you to type in. Let me show you what that looks like. Okay. And once you type in that code, you'll see this question. So I know many of you here are consultants. So if you could think of a client organization and think of up to 3 words that describe the culture in your client organization in the context of anti-racism, and just type that in for us. function. There you go. Just give everybody a chance to type in. Fearful, well-intended blind spots. It's pretty typical of what we hear, right, Peter?
Mm.
Complacent, supportive, yeah, well-intended. Positive intent, guilt, fear, a lot of fear. We find a lot of fear in the organizations we work with. Shallow outrage means, yeah, we see those as well. So we do this really to let people see that they're not alone in whatever thoughts they're having. And very often we don't often get supportive come up there. We get well intentioned, we get privileged, we get fearful, we get naive starting out. That's a lot of what we tend to hear from our clients. And we work with the whole organization, so at all levels. Thank you for sharing that. So,
One quick one, Ishreen.
hmm,
Just one quick, just observation. There is quite a generational thing about the words which come up as well. And
yes,
certainly, working with the younger people, they tend to be much more open and probably critical of the.
well, yeah, it's true. But I also find it with the older ones as well. There is a generational thing, but I think at the moment the organizations that are investing in intentional inclusion or creating a culture of anti-racism, I'm finding it runs across from the CEO down to the most junior person, is that they acknowledge and appreciate that there is a challenge here and it's scary. So then we go into the dialogue and we focus a lot on listening, because as we know, that's the key to having an effective dialogue. And we talk about listening at three levels. So there's listening to yourself, the conversation you're having with yourself, as well as the words that are coming out of your mouth. And the invitation in listening to yourself is to be curious about your inner dialogue, as well as listen to the words that are coming out of your mouth. And one of the framing exercises we do to help people get present to that is what I'm going to ask you to do now. So if you can get a sheet of paper, or if you're in the high-tech world, get your iPhone and notes or whatever, but draw a T like this. And on the top left hand there, if you can write the word included, and then just for a few seconds, brainstorm all the words that come into your mind, all the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions that come into your mind when you think of the word included, and write them in the column below there. And then on the other side, the other column, if you write the word excluded, and again, brainstorm and write down all the words that come into your mind, all the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, the reactions that come into your mind when you experience being excluded. Once you've done that, just look through both your lists and put a star or highlight somehow the top three words. in each column. And then I'm going to ask you to go back into Menti, and you'll see there now it's asking you for your 3 words around included. So if you can type in your top 3 words that reflect for you how you feel when you feel included. Creative, important, authentic, valued, part of something, love, confident, energized. I have a role. I'm in balance. It's frictionless. I'm confident. I'm welcome. Rugby. That's an interesting one. Great. Thank you. And now, similarly, please type in how it feels for you when you're excluded. Your top 3 words there. Outside, wrong, disposable, unimportant, worthless, unwanted, ready to flee or freeze, wrong, outside, guarded and hyper aware, angry, withdrawn, wrong, detached, revenge. So now we want to explore the journey of moving. First of all, acknowledging excluded and moving forward. And we're now going to share with you one of the exercises we do around now listening to the other. So the second element of listening is listening to the other. And really, when you're listening to the other, suspending that inner dialogue and really hearing what the other person's saying. So in a moment, we're going to give you a chance to dialogue with each other. And what you're going to do is you're going to go into a breakout room and you're going to choose an A and a B. And A, you're going to ask the question, tell me what it's like to be excluded. And then you're not going to say anything, you're just going to listen. And B, you're going to respond and answer the question. And you're going to have 3 minutes to respond and answer the question. Actually, I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking I'll give you 1 minute. Okay, so you're going to have 1 minute to respond and answer the question. And remember, A, you're not allowed to say anything. You might nod, you might ask the question again, but you're not going to say anything. All right. And then after a minute, you're going to swap. And then when you come back, we'll share what that was like for you.
Ishreen, there's a mingle after this. So if we overrun by 5 minutes or so, it won't be a problem.
Lovely. Thank you. So is that clear for everybody? Does anybody have any questions? Okay, so I'm going to put you in your breakout rooms now, and I will let you know when you've had your minute.
We had to be pulled out of that. We were into it. We had to be pulled away.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So what was that like? What was your experience talking about the experience of being excluded?
That wasn't very hard to do with somebody that I'd never met before, and actually revealed something quite deep about myself. That's actually quite current. So I said something quite important to me, to somebody I've never met before. And I've got a strange feeling that that other person told me something similar back.
That's, you know, that's the beauty of the listening circle approach, is that people feel safe to say things that they wouldn't say otherwise, and it's quite gentle, deliberately so.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Normally we would spend a lot more time sharing about this experience, but we're going to move us on now, and we're going to move to the group dialogue. And the group dialogue is really where it all happens. It's where the experience and the knowledge of everybody comes together, and we create new thinking and new ideas, and move the conversation forward significantly. So again, we have in Menti a question for you. And the question is, in the context of creating an anti-racist culture in your organization or for your clients, what questions need to be answered? What needs to be addressed? So if you would go into Menti now, please, and share what comes up for you as the questions that really need to be handled, that need to be answered if we're going to create an anti-racist culture. Beautiful. How committed are we really? What risks will you take? What comfort will you release? How vulnerable are you willing to be? How do we get to know ourselves? What is being racist? These are all the kinds of questions that come up and we address. So what we do is we typically work with about 30 people in the room, and they all come up with questions. And then, yeah, what's really playing out here? How different would this organization feel if everyone in it felt completely valued, included all of the time? Yeah. Rationalize why being racist is unacceptable, totally in the interest of society and your part in it, and coincidentally in the interest of the business. What does the non-racist end state look like? How do you know when you are there? So what we do with this is we send everybody on a short break, and then we create a new Menti where they then get to vote on which are the most important. And then we go into breakout rooms and they dialogue in smaller groups of about 4 or 5. What's really the issue here? What's the question that really needs to be answered? And why is this an issue? And then they come back and share. So what we're going to do here is to short circuit that, and let's pick a question. Which ones? Peter, you choose. Which one do you choose?
Oh, that's unfair.
Oh, let me choose then. Okay. How about what does the no, this is interesting. Somebody wrote, what does the non-racist end state look like? So we're very clear to distinguish between racist, non-racist, and anti-racist. Right?
Yeah.
So non-racist means that you might hear somebody say something that's offensive and not do anything about it. Anti-racist means you will hold them to account. Okay, so shall we dialogue about that question, Peter? What does the non-racist end state look like? Should we say what does, well, no, actually, how different would this organization feel if everyone in it felt completely valued and included all of the time? Let's dialogue that one. There you go. We've got about 6 people in the room, so I think we could treat this as a small room rather than you know, we have the small room dialogue, and then we come back, and as a large group we dialogue it, and what we find is that the conversation evolves as we do that. So let's pick this question. I'm going to put it in the chat. How different would this organization feel if everyone in it felt completely valued and included all of the time? Over to you, Peter.
Okay, I'm going to appoint myself as facilitator. And very quickly, the ground rules. There are no rules. No, sorry, of course there are rules. But let me just remind you, don't forget the roles, the voicing. So proposing, making a suggestion, the opposing, the following, and the bystander. So who would like to begin this dialogue? The question. And perhaps no, actually that would be, well, maybe the person who put it there. What was your thinking behind proposing this? Was that you, Neil?
Yeah. Well, we see sustained success as being a desirable end outcome, and the route to sustained success is everyone being the very best version of themselves as much of the time as possible, but not being triggered. And the route to that is through high quality leadership. So if everyone, and in order for everyone to be the very best that they can be all the time, you can't be excluding people or infringing people at all, really. I mean, I'm sure there are moments when you've got to say, well, no, we can't do that or whatever, but that it has to have a sort of a sensible justification, and racism or sexism or any kind of exclusion or even biases against people for their thinking styles. None of those enable people to be the best version of themselves all of the time.
Okay,
so.
Thank you. Thoughts, and again, thinking, particularly now, we're looking at the following. So there may be somebody who supports this and can find ways of adding to it. Then also we need a devil's advocate, and oh, Richard.
Well, I'm not normally a devil's advocate, and I don't think this is necessarily, it's more of a building on and sort of expanding, because I don't know that I think of, and I don't have the exact wording of the question, but I don't think inclusion is a static end state. I think it is something we strive for. And if we are growing and learning, it is inevitable where we will rub up against each other. And in fact, I think that's a good thing. And so it's about the capacity, in my experience, to be open when we do have those rubs, because it's the humility to say, what didn't I know? And what can I learn that we can move forward through? Because I feel like if I were to believe that there will be an end state, we will have arrived, then I'm done. When I think I'm done, because there's always more, I guess is how I would frame it.
So shall I play the opponent?
Okay.
That's just not possible. I mean, how could you possibly have everybody in the organization feeling completely valued and included all of the time? We don't have the budget to do that. And, it's just not possible.
And I'm agreeing with Ishreen here, because we'll get nothing done if we leave it to everybody to make a decision every time. So I'm being in a supportive role here of the negative view. We'll never get anywhere. We'll never get anywhere. We'll be going around and we'll be voting on everything, like the color of the toilet paper, what coffee we're going to have. Just ridiculous. We've got to have some leadership here where we push things forward. And if you don't like it, just lump it,
And you know what? We're a UK.
Time out. So who would like to play the bystander role? What's happening? What are you noticing? let me notice what I'm noticing is I'm not sure you're really listening to each other. I haven't heard it's either or. It's either there's going to be this wonderful state at the end. I thought there was some really interesting ideas coming out of Richard's point around what kind of things we might need. It can't be an absolute, but actually there are certain things that we can begin to build in. But I'm also hearing a very strong reaction, say from Roger, from Ishreen around, no, so maybe just reflect for a moment or half a minute if we're running short of time, in terms of what might have emerged from this so far that we can actually work with. We may have sorry, go.
One of the things that came up for me in what felt almost built into the process was a magnification of the duality, that we were actually creating opposing views that if around the things that I truly feel invested in, to get it equated to the toilet paper could actually feel more silencing for me in the moment. And if I didn't have the courage to say that or speak up, I might just remain silent.
As a facilitator, we would address that normally. You know,
what I would like to identify is where's the common place that we want to get to. Presumably this organization has some objective, some place it wants to go to, and we, Ishreen and Roger and Richard and I, all want to get to that same place. The question is really,
that's right. So
what's the best way of going about it?
So if I switch hats now and stop being the opponent, I would say, well, you know, what actually would it feel like? What would it feel like if everybody here could feel completely valued and included all of the time?
Can I switch from facilitator to?
Over here, let's hear Casey. I'm going to facilitate. Let's hear Casey.
The first rule of facilitation is you stay outside the communication.
Thank you, Roger. Yes.
He knows that. He's playing because he knows he's with a bunch of facilitators here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where we would go typically with this, is what would it look like? And why is it important? Why do we need to address this question? What makes it an important issue?
One question I've got is it more important to focus on the people with negative views and to remove these barriers and try and understand why those people have those negative views first? Or is it more important to look at the reinforcing positive views from Richard and say, how can we make these things happen? And then I guess I've answered my own question. You have to deal with the negatives first, don't you? Because the negatives are the stoppers, and then you can go in a direction, right? Is that the way to do it?
Actually, in the listening circle, we don't deal with any of it. We're listening. So we base everybody a voice. And in this process, so in the groups, you might get this kind of conversation, but when they come back, they're feeding back, what makes this important? Why is this an issue? And what needs to happen?
I think it's a great question, Roger. And I think the answer is yes.
No.
And no. Because I think, and again, we don't have time to do this now, but in a sense, we need to deal with both. But actually, this idea of the vision, the end game, if we get that right and the incentive is strong enough, it may help remove some of those negative barriers. If the negative barriers are too strong, then I'm not even listening to the vision. So as always, it depends on the group, depends on what they're coming with.
I could also see if that vision is so far from reality that would disengage and turn people off from actually kind of feeling like, well, it's too far out. And so there's something about kind of bringing it back a bit closer to the here and now, and what can we actually do that moves us on from whatever our starting point is. So sometimes I think those visioning things can just feel just disconnected. And then, you know, go back to the day job, carry on as you were. So it's something about bridging that bigger aspiration with realism, I think.
I also think there's a tension in what gets defined as the negative view.
Yeah.
Because I think there's views that I would want to write off as negative. That's resistance. You know, everything is going to be mired in slow decision making is one negative view, but it is also pain and suffering that people might be experiencing if that comes through in a listening circle, and that degree of vulnerability I'm not prepared for. I might also want to silence that.
So can I just set the context of this? So this is a listening circle, which is one part of a 9-month process.
Right.
Oh.
So the purpose of the listening circle is really to give everybody a voice, to feel appreciated, valued, and heard, and to feel that they have a say in the transformation process.
Okay.
So we don't address the negatives or the positives. We just ask questions and we listen.
So you just sort of stuff.
And then to address Richard's point, we have different kinds of listening circles. So we have a generic listening circle that everybody's invited to attend, but then we have separate listening circles for the underrepresented groups so that they can say what's really there for them.
Do you find that people generally behave better in that environment? I mean, someone who might behave quite badly normally will behave better in the circle because of the culture and the peer pressure there, or do they continue to voice divisive stuff?
They generally behave better, I find, and then the bad behavior comes out during the mobilization process further down the line, and then that gets dealt with through the mobilization process and the implementation process, because this happens very early in the cycle. This happens while we're still in the scoping, analysis, and design phase.
I have to say at this stage, Neil, I've noticed you've behaved really well in this circle. So
I'm really trying, Peter. It's hard.
Ishreen, are you running these listening circles specifically around racism, or is it applicable? Yeah.
Any underrepresented group, but what we will do is we will have, like I told you in the beginning, we'll have somebody with the felt experience of what the organization is trying to address. In the team. So mostly last year, obviously, it was anti-racism. You know, before that, it's been around gender. Who knows what it'll be this year, right? It's just forming. I have a feeling it's around socioeconomic and privilege, and so we're kicking off some research. You know, so we're actually kicking off some research at the moment that we'd love everybody to take part in and collaborate with us on, in looking at how does privilege impact inclusion.
Have you any experience of running this with teams, and if so, how is that different?
Did you say teams or teens?
Teens with an N.
Teenagers, right?
Yeah.
We haven't, but it would be very interesting to do. We haven't done that. It would be really.
They're a badly behaved lot, in my experience. They really need some of this.
Need it. No, we haven't. Mostly organizations.
Like her father.
Mostly in organizations who want to create a culture of anti-racism or a culture of inclusion.
Yeah. I mean, I often think that bullying is a design feature of schools, rather, you know, it's a feature, not a bug, to help create conformity, and so schools just don't deal with it, and actually having proper dialogue might be a way of dealing with it.
Although, Neil, I think even without schools, I don't know if you've met kids, They're awesome. They're mean all the time.
They're really mean.
They're mean. So, and like, I mean, I think they're more aware of the meanness, but they're still mean, right? So I don't think you can blame schools. I think there's something innately human about othering people, whether it's the fat kid or the ginger kid. Like, they've always done this, right? And now it's been called out in the workplace. And
yeah, you see, I think
there's something humanly, like, innate about that.
I know. You're saying it's a bug. I'm saying it's a feature.
Well, I mean, it's part of your leadership maturity model, right? That whole tribal thing is about, you know, me and my tribe. And I think people are always finding their tribe, and that reforms over time. So I'm wondering, you know, we're trying to do something that's sort of very almost like what's not in us.
Yeah, maybe.
I've seen it work with teenagers.
Yeah.
In Sri Lanka, in Nepal, in Rwanda, where again, it's using sport and leadership, but built around that, we have these discussions and address these kind of issues. And it's quite, they're teenagers, but actually it's like that reading. There's something within them actually is very beautiful as well.
I've actually seen it work even better with younger children.
Yeah.
And I think it's at teenage, if you haven't built in, I mean, the opportunity, the sweet spot for me is elementary school. Because if you wait until teenage years, when some of those other dynamics, but the capacity of conversations around racism, homophobia with kids who are not in this us versus them yet is really rich. What I've been finding in the US, and I think this showed up a little bit in some of the words I put in there, is listening circles clearly a really effective best practice. Yet what I'm also seeing, especially last June with George Floyd's murder and the things that were going on here, was that a lot of organizations, many of my clients included, said, oh, we need to do something. Were not prepared, took the rhetoric of anti-racism without understanding it, did listening circles without really intending necessarily to do a whole lot more than that. And in fact, I think it made things worse because people who were on the fence gave it a, let me see if they're really committed, and they weren't, ran the risk of being re-traumatized by making themselves vulnerable in a space that actually wasn't ultimately safe because nothing else was going to happen. So embedding this, Ishreen, as you're saying, in a much more intentional process is so important.